KyotoIrish.com. That's KyotoIrish.com. Season 3 of Notebook on Cities and Culture is brought to you by Carl Haley and Daniel Murphy. Just before rolling, you mentioned that there are a great many Irish pubs here in Kyoto, maybe more than the city can support. Do you have any guesses to hazard at all as to why there are so many Irish pubs in Kyoto?
It's a mystery, isn't it? When I first came to Kyoto in 1998, there was one British pub called the Pig and Whistle of celebrated infamy. And then a few years later, came back and there was one Irish pub, and then it became two, and then there were three. But just in the last couple of years, it's expanded kind of exponentially. I think I'd need two hands now to count them all. Yes, it's a mystery. I'm flummoxed by it. I think there's maybe a slight craze for Irish music. Certainly the very first Irish pub in Kyoto was called Field. It's still there. And basically the guy who started that, he told me directly he started it because he liked Irish music and he wanted a place where he could play it. So it was just kind of a hobby for him to start this pub up. The other ones I can't really say, but they all have Irish music playing in regularly, so I think that's probably got something to do with it.
It's Notebook on Cities and Culture. I'm Colin Marshall, sitting down here over beers this evening in Kyoto, Japan, with Michael Lambe, who, if you're researching Kyoto, or as I was before coming here, you will find his blog, Deep Kyoto, before you find almost anything else. It's about, I would say it's a strong guide for expat life in Kyoto, but really it's about where to go if you don't want to just do the classic expat stuff. He's also a teacher here in Kyoto. And as well, he does public relations for the Kyoto Journal, which you'll also stumble upon very quickly when you're looking up Kyoto-related writings. Now, I want to get back to the way you described the Pig and Whistle. How did you say they were sort of the noted in gloriousness? Yes. What went on at the Pig and Whistle?
That's something I don't really want to talk about.
You don't have to talk about it, but I think we should allude to listeners who will never know, who will never experience this.
It's known to be a place to meet people who are interested in meeting you for, shall we say romance?
Yes, indeed.
And I think that was true years ago, and it's probably still true now. I want to put it on record that I have absolutely no need to go there myself anymore, or I'll be in trouble later. But it was the kind of meeting place, and it was, as for a long time, I think it was the only kind of Western style pub. So it was the kind of a bit of a central hub for foreign gatherings in the old days, long before I came here. But
in this city, it's in this area, in Kansai at least, it's got a reputation for being, Kyoto does, the place that interests foreigners the most. And aside from the sort of pigs and whistles of the town, why is that?
For most of its history, it was the capital of Japan, and it was the center of culture, and it still is in many ways the center of culture. A lot of history is here. A crazy amount of temples, thousands of shrines that have preserved so much culture, and in their own small way, a lot of natural beauty in their gardens and their grounds. A lot of the art has been preserved here. A lot of the culture is preserved here. So traditions have been preserved here. So whatever you're really interested in Japanese culture, in Japanese traditions, if you want to get further into that, this is the place to come. This is the place that everybody wants to come to. And it kind of has a kind of romantic mystique as well. I remember when I first heard about Kyoto, I heard about it as being the place to see the cherry blossoms in Japan, and that just sounded so romantic to me. And I was very fortunate. The first time I saw cherry blossoms in Japan was in Kyoto. I just arrived in Kyoto at the right time as the cherry blossoms were blooming, and they reached their full bloom while I was here for just staying for 6 days. And it was absolutely gorgeous, and I'll never forget that. It was a wonderful welcome.
There's a sense in which in Kyoto, then, in a way that you don't get in Tokyo or Osaka, where I'm staying, these major cities, that some of the old ways linger on despite the new building that's gone on, despite the fact that Kyoto seems modern walking through it.
Yes, well, again, it depends on the area you're in. Maybe you haven't seen some of the older neighborhoods yet, so you can go to Higashiyama, and you can go to Arashiyama, Pontocho, these kind of areas, Gion. You can see some of the older Machiya-style buildings and see some of the older city, but a lot has been lost. And if you see old pictures, black and white pictures, from not that long ago, really, 60s, 70s even, it's actually quite shocking how much has gone in the name of, I don't know, not really progress, but just utilitarianism. That it is quite difficult to maintain old wooden Machiya-style buildings. They're not profitable, or as profitable as building, a big tall apartment block or a car park or whatever, which is what a lot of them turn into, unfortunately. And they're still being torn down today, and it's a continuing problem that a lot of the culture is still being destroyed every year. But at least some of it is being preserved, and there is a slight movement that's started up to renovate some of these old buildings and turn them for different kind of uses, like restaurants or cafes, or some of the places I write about on my blog, obviously, but all kinds of places have been recreated, as it were.
Is there more interest to preserve old Japan on the part of foreigners than there is of Japanese people themselves? What's been your experience with that?
I think foreigners tend to bewail the loss of the old things more than the Japanese do. Oh, why have you done this? Why don't you preserve this wonderful culture so that I can come and visit it? But and take some snapshots. But fair enough. If you actually live in a machiya, it's a bit cold in the winter and uncomfortable, and But these places can be renovated in such a way that they can be more comfortable. But it costs money, as I say. I think the people who actually have the ability to preserve it are basically the Japanese people who are here, who own these buildings, and they are the people who are doing it. And as I say, some of the wonderful machiya buildings that you can visit are cafes and restaurants that Japanese people have set up. I don't know of any set up by foreign residents.
We were talking about earlier off mic, and I'll ramble enough with this question, so feel free to take a drink. Certainly, I don't want to stop you from that. We mentioned that applying for the JET program, the teaching program that brought you over here originally in the 90s, applicants so often put Kyoto as their desired destination and so rarely get it. You put Hokkaido. Why did you put that?
Well, I had some vague romantic notion about living in the wild, snow-swept north, and encountering the indigenous Ainu people of Hokkaido. They're a minority group who have been largely forgotten by history. And that's the kind of history that I'm personally interested in, is the people who are kind of left behind. And, they say history is written by the winners, but it's the losers that I'm interested in, basically. So I want to support the losers. Obviously, that didn't happen, and that dream was left behind. But it was just a side kind of vague notion. It wasn't anything I was particularly serious about, I think.
And so where did they end up sending you, Jet? And where did you land when you got here? Not literally which airport, but what part of the country did you find yourself in?
In a way, I was kind of delighted because I'm from the northeast of England, and they sent me to the northeast of Japan. It's kind of a backwater, basically, which is the same as where I'm from, and so I could kind of relate to it. But it's also it's Fukushima is now is obviously known for the disaster, but in those days it wasn't known at all. Nobody'd heard of it. I hadn't heard of it. Didn't know where I was going, and I was sent up there, and I was delighted. Everybody was very friendly, very welcoming, very kind. Super welcoming. Absolutely ridiculous response to my arrival in my first classes. It was like the Beatles in 1963 arriving in America, just screaming, and I used to walk around town and my students would run up to me and greet me, and it was a bit, as I say, a bit of a backwards. Didn't have too many foreigners there in those days, so I was a bit special, which I hope didn't go to my head too much. But the other good thing about it was the countryside was absolutely adorable. It was really beautiful, mountains, and I just remember I could look out my window every day and see these beautiful snow-covered mountains, or I'd look up and I'd see a hawk flying in the air, something I didn't see in England, with our rolling hills and our sparrows, our cheerful Cockney sparrows. It's not something I was used to. So it was a kind of wild landscape for me that was quite thrilling. Yeah.
What can you tell us about Fukushima? Listeners who only know it as the site of a disaster now. Like the first they'd heard of Fukushima was that a reactor exploded there. What can you say about what the place is actually like?
Ironically, Fukushima was known as a kind of a safe place. It was one of the few places in Japan where the tectonic plates were quite stable, and I think that's why they built the power plants there on the coastline. Unfortunately, building them on the coastline turned out to be a bit of a mistake. But when you have a disaster of that magnitude, it doesn't matter where you build them. And I think that stability is also reflected in the personality of the people there. They're very solid people, very reliable people. Like I say, very friendly, very welcoming. Really good people. And I really enjoyed my 3 years there. As for what kind of a place it was famous for its fruit. So, obviously, the cesium levels now, the contamination from the radioactive fallout has caused a lot of harm there to the local economy is largely agricultural. That's a huge shame, a real shame for that prefecture. Tourism wise, it was also famous for being having Aizu. Aizu is the western side of Fukushima prefecture. Beautiful mountains, beautiful coloured lakes, different colours because of the volcanic sediment, and just the most dramatic landscape. I mean, absolutely gorgeous. Yeah, and the festivals that they have there every summer. Taimatsu Akashi Festival was one of the 3 big fire festivals in Japan, in the town of Skagawa, a very little town. Every summer they would, autumn, they'd take these huge, I guess you'd say, bundles of straw that were woven together. They were, as high as a 2-story building. Carry them through the streets, prop them on end, and a man in a loincloth would climb to the top and set fire to it and then scuttle down, and there'd be like 30 of these things just burning all at once, just this towering inferno. And very primal. The local high school students beating their taiko drums, and great stuff. I really enjoyed my time there.
How often have you been able to get up to the region since the disaster over a year ago?
I haven't actually been back to Fukushima. I've been away from Fukushima for over a decade now, so I've pretty much lost touch with most of the people I know there. I'm in touch with a couple of people, and a few people who've moved down to Tokyo now as well. But earlier this year I went up to Miyagi Prefecture, which is just north of Fukushima, to help with a volunteer organization which is organized here in Kyoto. It's called IDRO Japan, IDRO Japan, International Disaster Relief Organization Japan, if I might give that a plug.
Yes, please do.
You can find that online fairly easily, and they're well worthy of support. I went up there. It's a very small, hands-on organization run by a local carpenter called Robert Mangold, an American who's lived here for many years. His profession is both carpentry and dealing in antiques, but he organized this thing where we go up and we help build things or fix things. And I helped build and fix things. I helped build an office for a fishing cooperative in a town that had been completely devastated, where it was the first building to be built there since the town was effectively destroyed. And I went up there at the time of the anniversary, so it was a kind of profound time to be there and quite moving to be kind of participating in the first signs of hope, renewed hope.
It seems like not only is Japan a place where disasters are a fact of life, but quickly dealing with a disaster seems to be a characteristic of the Japanese people, of Japanese culture, of rebuilding and getting on with it as fast as possible. Would you say that's true?
Everybody said that it was amazing how fast they got the roads fixed, didn't they? Disaster is something that is kind of ingrained in Japanese consciousness. It could happen anytime, anywhere. You're living on fault lines, and every year we have typhoons. Tsunamis are not uncommon, although the one that we had in 2011 was, of historical magnitude. But we were always aware that disaster could happen at any time, so being prepared is kind of second nature, yeah. And Japanese people are very good at working together as a team.
There's a sense that foreigners in Japan get imbued with that spirit, do they not?
If you've lived here for long enough that you want to stay here for the rest of your life, as many people do, then of course you love this town, it's your home, or you love this country and it's your home. And when something bad happens, you want to help out, yes. So naturally, that transfers, yes. And also, part of living in Japan is you start adopting Japanese mannerisms and customs and things. Bowing when you're talking to somebody on the phone, for example, is something that I think many people have done it,
You caught yourself bowing on the phone.
Yeah, it's happened, yeah.
And when that happened, you were like, oh, this place has gotten into me.
Yeah,
was that the moment? Yes, exactly. I should splice the song in.
Yeah.
But when
the other thing is leaving taxi doors open when I go home to England, because taxi doors are automatically shut here.
Oh yes.
So, and it's annoying for the taxi driver if you actually close them yourself, because you're messing about with the machine.
Oh, yes.
But I've done that in England. I've left the taxi door open and completely forgotten, just out of habit.
I mean, I haven't even been in Japan a week, but there are amenities here that I'm getting used to that it's going to be a shock when I get back to the States, and none of them are there. I mean, does that every time you leave Japan, do you get that sense of, wow, there's a lot of conveniences that the rest of the world doesn't have?
Well, yes and no. Everywhere's got its own conveniences, I think. I mean, when I go back to England now, I'm always delighted at the vegetarian selection in the supermarkets.
Yes.
It's wonderful, And of course,
I've heard vegetarianism is difficult in Japan. I mean, I've heard it from your blog as well as other sources.
Well, I came here. I was a vegetarian before I came, and now I eat fish. And there's two reasons for that. One is it is difficult to be a real vegetarian in Japan. The other one is basically I like fish, but and the fish here is fantastic. So seafood in Japan is obviously one of the things Japanese culture is celebrated for. But
I've heard from vegetarians who visit here that it's like they always frame it like in Japan they don't really know what vegetarianism is. You kind of have to explain it afresh every time. Is that true?
Well, they often think it's for religious reasons. They'll ask you that. Is it for religious reasons?
I've heard you can say you're Buddhist and you can then get a vegetarian meal.
Well, it depends on the kind of Buddhist you are, really. I mean, most Buddhists in Japan, most people in Japan are nominally Buddhist, but it's not a particularly religious thing. It's like, I don't know, being Anglican in England or something. Or
C of E.
Yeah, or Catholic in Spain. I mean, in Japan, Jodo Shinshu is the most common Buddhist sect, and it's. I work in a Jodo Shinshu school. I hear them singing what sound very much like Anglican hymns in the morning, and it's similar. It's just like a family business. You inherit the role of monk for your temple in the family. They pay a lot of lip service to the religion, but I don't think it's taken too seriously. Personally, I believe religion shouldn't be taken too seriously. I think it's a means to an end. But if you're talking about Zen Buddhism or something, that's something separate, and it's far more intense and serious and more spiritual, maybe. And that kind of Buddhism, yes, strictly speaking, probably shouldn't eat meat, but even then, with a Zen attitude, you probably won't worry too much if you do eat meat accidentally.
Right. It's one of those things that I think it'll be common among listeners who have an interest in Japan. They may have done it themselves, or they'll have a lot of friends who have, who've done the JET program, who've taught English here in Japan. And, most of them who teach English via JET, they leave after their years and they chalk it up to experience, essentially. But how did the moment come where you decided that you wanted to not just teach English here for a stretch, but to make an actual home here in Japan?
Oh, I never decided that.
Right. Decision is the wrong word, but you realized at some point, hey, I guess I'm staying here.
I've been here for 10 years. How did that happen?
10 years. It was 10 years when the moment of realization was like...
As I told you earlier before we started recording, I'm not very good with numbers, but...
I don't need a number, but was it a realization like, hey, I'm living here now. I didn't even know that before, but I've just accepted that I guess I'm living in Japan.
I'm not sure that I will stay here forever. I might, go home. I think actually in a few years I might go back for a little while at least, just to get in touch with my roots again, touch home base, see my family more than I do now. I do miss them.
Are there also non-familial things you miss about England specifically?
The TV.
The TV?
British TV is pretty great, yeah.
It is pretty great. I come from America where TV is pretty bad, and we all look up to British TV.
Well, there's some good shows in America, aren't there? I watch a few, but Japanese TV is generally appalling.
What's wrong with it?
Just lots of what they call variety shows, where the same celebrities are trooped out to be amusing and make corny jokes, and I don't know. I can't watch it. I mean, I think there's some good stuff on there, but it's kind of hard to find it, because there's so much dross, cheaply made dross. So and the news programs aren't very good either. I just get all my news off the internet now because it seems like they're deliberately making the news as boring as possible in order to stop you being interested in current affairs. I have a theory that that's a deliberate policy, especially by NHK, the Japanese equivalent of the BBC. It's kind of the establishment network.
Not as respected as the BBC, it seems.
Yes, perhaps so. Well, the thing with the BBC is they have the licensing system in England where they send around the vans to check whether you have a license or not.
Is that consistently enforced still?
I think they fine you if they catch you. But in Japan, all they have is some obnoxious men who come around knocking on your door, trying to get inside your apartment to check that you have a TV, whether you want them to or not, and demanding payment. So, all you have to do is just be firm and say no. And then they don't get any money. But it must be the worst job in the world, that. It's like...
Worst job in Japan, certainly.
Well, yes, certainly. I think Murakami Haruki wrote a short story about having a father who had that job.
I remember that story. I like that story.
Yeah, it's pretty good, isn't it? I can't remember the title of it now, but
I'll link to it if I can find that online, listeners.
his father comes across as quite, obnoxious character, and
Yes, just bringing him along to have a
it does
sympathetic...
reflect the character of the people who come around to your apartment.
Oh, they're really like that story. Have you ever had one bring their kid along and just so they can have a sympathetic figure?
I never had that, no, but I had years ago in my first apartment in Japan. I lived in teachers' apartments when I was on the JET program, and we had, other foreigners living in the same block of apartment. One of them warned me that the NHK man was coming round. And the thing was, I just wanted to go out. I was just about to go out. So I was in my, what we call the genkan, which is just the entranceway of your apartment, just in front of the door, putting on my shoes. And then the doorbell went. So I just stood there and waited. And I waited and waited and waited. And he kept knocking and banging and calling out and calling out. I was thinking, why doesn't he go away? If I don't answer, it's obvious I'm not here. Why doesn't he go away? And what I hadn't noticed was that he eventually went away, but only when he went away did I realize there was a little eye hole thing in my door.
Oh, yes.
Which I taped a bit of cardboard over to stop people from seeing in from the other side. And it had slipped, so he could see me the whole time, just standing there, kind of staring into space like a madman.
He really did know you were there, but eventually the time came when he had to get...
Why doesn't he just go away? He was thinking, why doesn't this strange guy just answer the door?
Right, I just want his TV money. Or why didn't he say no? After JET, after Fukushima, I mean, you weren't straight to Kyoto. Where did you go next? What was the pathway to finding Kyoto and figuring it was going to be the place for you in Japan?
Well, I'm a small town kind of person, and I'd lived in, my university was Cambridge, which is also quite a small town. And then I lived there after university. I lived and worked there for a few years, and then I came to Japan and I lived in a small city. And I thought, I want to try living in a big city. So a friend of mine the year previously had moved down to Tokyo and had a pretty good job at a pretty good school, which had a very good training program for its teachers. So he told me, and I was impressed by what he told me. So I applied for the same job and I got it, and thus ensued 4 quite happy years living in Tokyo.
And for Tokyo enthusiasts, what part were you in? What neighborhood? Where were your what was your sort of sphere of Tokyo?
My sphere? Well, I was working and living largely in the Shinjuku area. Strictly speaking, I was in Shin-Okubo, which is at the time was quite seedy area, but is now celebrated as being a kind of Korean town of Tokyo. There's a kind of Korean boom being going on last couple of years or so. They did have some very good Korean food there, I must say. But it was basically 2 seconds from the center of Shinjuku, which is one of the center points of the nightlife in Tokyo. So it was kind of a wild, exciting time. I had a lot of good friends there I worked with and played with, and it was a very exciting city to live in.
As you've described, a small town person. I mean, how did was there some sort of clash with your personal sensibility being in Tokyo, the biggest city of all of them in the world?
I remember when I first visited Tokyo, I was kind of overwhelmed by just the huge amounts of people. Just it was incredible. You feel really insignificant and small, like an ant. And then you just get used to it. It becomes second nature. And I remember my sister came to visit me a few years later, and I was showing her around. I took her to Shibuya, the crossing there, Shibuya crossing. Just thousands of people crossing the street every time the light changes, and it's pretty, awe-inspiring. And I said, "What do you think?" And she was just like, just this glazed expression, unable to react. It was just too much for her to comprehend,
Slack-jawed.
Yeah.
Just gawping.
Just didn't say anything, just, oh, yeah, it's all right,
Right. Too much stimulus, right?
Yeah, I think it was too much for her, yeah. I mean, I was taking her around on this 10-day tour of Japan, basically, and it was too much. Yeah.
We talked about Tokyo over the first round of beers as being its own country in some sense, so that was probably my term for it. I've never been to Tokyo, but it does seem like it is its own international place in Japan, perhaps not representative of Japan. How would you react to that as a description of it?
I can only speak from this perspective of an expat who lived in Tokyo. I think that's a very common experience for expats in Tokyo. My personal experience, I did not need to speak Japanese. I made friends with other foreigners from all over the world, or Japanese people who wanted to speak English. Many Japanese people can speak English in Tokyo. You can indulge in any kind of cultural pursuit you like without really needing to speak much Japanese. It's completely unnecessary. So for me, I felt like I was forgetting why I came, and I felt like I did live in a separate place, that Tokyo wasn't really Japan for me.
I think this is why I've based myself for these couple weeks in Osaka, so my Japanese, which blows chunks now, will only suck when I leave, but we'll see how well that works. But I do wonder, is it true the smaller the place you are, the more remote, the less international, the better your Japanese gets? Is it true for you?
It could be. I mean, basically, Japanese is quite a difficult language to learn, especially for somebody from a European or American background. If you only know European languages, and the language is so different, and especially the written language with the Chinese characters, the thousands of Chinese characters that you need to learn, all the different readings and all the different meanings, shades of meaning. It's a huge task to take on, so a lot of people just give up. And no matter where you are, unless you build some relationships with Japanese people who won't speak English to you, then you won't make much progress. And for me, I felt like I finally arrived in Japan when in Kyoto I made real Japanese friends who only spoke Japanese, didn't speak any English, and I knew, they would be my friends for life. And then I felt like, oh, okay, I'm home now, I'm settled.
Tell me how you discovered Kyoto for yourself.
Well, I visited during the JET program, and like I told you, it was the first time I saw cherry blossoms in Japan. And it was beautiful, and I went around all the usual tourist sites, the beautiful temples and the gardens and the shrines, and along the path of philosophy, and the prime season for it with the trailing cherry blossoms, and it was wonderful. So I had a very romantic image from that, and I visited a couple of times after that. And then I took my sister again years later when I was living in Tokyo. I took my sister here and her husband, and we rented some cycles, and I was cycling around. I was cycling by the Imperial Palace Park, and I could see the mountains in the distance, and the roads were relatively traffic-free. The atmosphere was quite calm and peaceful, and I thought, my God, why am I not living here? Why am I living in Tokyo with all that hurly-burly? Even when I'm not busy, I feel busy in Tokyo, Why don't I live here? It's just nice, It's peaceful, it's calm, and you have trees, you have easy access to nature. And this is the wonderful thing about Kyoto, is it's a city, but it's a small city. It has everything you need, really. And if it doesn't, you can just hop on a train and be in Osaka in an hour and get that too. But also you have easy access to nature. We're sitting here in this cafe looking at this river, which is a nature preserve. There's all kinds of wildlife in that river, all kinds of wonderful birds and other things I don't know the names for. And yeah, there's some koipu in there as well, actually. Koipu from South America have colonized the Kamo River. But it's a beautiful thing. And then you've got mountains all around. Well, they're hills, really, but we call them mountains because we have a lot of pride in Kyoto. And, woods and forests and, very easy access to nature. So even if you get stressed with your job, within 30 minutes you can be at peace, absorbing a beautiful landscape or in a temple garden. It's wonderful.
And the about page of your blog, Deep Kyoto, it describes, I guess, the founding of it, or your founding of it, as being born of a desire to stay away from where the expats usually are, to go to the areas of Kyoto, to go to the events in Kyoto where you hear and speak more Japanese, or that at least aren't the expected things to do as a foreigner in Japan. Tell me a little bit about how that desire of yours became a blog.
Right, well, I arrived in Kyoto and I didn't know many people. So at first, like most foreigners do, I went to the foreign bars, the bars where foreigners gather. But, I still felt kind of anonymous. And it wasn't until I just stumbled across this tiny little hole-in-the-wall bar, little rock bar, called Tsurugi. In a side street. I just stumbled across it, that I started meeting interesting people, interesting people who were friendly. Kyoto has a reputation for not being friendly, but these people were very friendly, and they wanted to talk about music, Japanese music. I mean, it must be quite unusual for them to meet a foreigner who is interested in Japanese pops.
Right.
From the 1970s or something.
And then that's a zone of your interest?
Well, I just like music. So if something's playing and I like the sound of it, I'll say, "Oh, what's that?" And that's always a good way to start a conversation, isn't it? Yeah. And my Japanese level had gotten to the stage where I could hold a conversation with somebody in a bar. So I went to these places where, like Tsurugi, where it was only Japanese people. And they were there to talk about music or just to listen and have a drink and relax. And I started making friends that way. And then I thought to myself, well, isn't it a shame, all these people coming to Kyoto, especially, but Japan in general, but they come to Kyoto and they go around all the usual tourist sites and they see the temples and shrines. But in the evening, they don't really know where they want to go for a drink, so they go to an Irish pub because that's familiar.
Because there's one every block, apparently.
An Irish pub or a British pub, yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of them. Or they, if they're stumped for what to eat and they can't understand the menus, I see them hovering around and then eventually plumping for McDonald's,
McDonald's.
Yeah, and then it's such a shame because there are these lovely little places that aren't mentioned in the tourist books, cafes and bars and restaurants, and some of them are struggling to survive because there's a lot of competition. So partly wanting to support those places and partly wanting to get foreigners to experience another side of Kyoto, not just the high culture but also the modern urban side of it, and also just to encourage those places to continue so that I can keep going there for selfish reasons as well. I started keeping this blog and exploring some of the places that, once you find one place, then that leads you to another kind of thing.
Right. Is there a sense, I used to live in Santa Barbara, California, which is enough of a tourist town, enough of a town of outsiders that if you can't get the non-locals as a business, you probably won't survive. Is it the same in Kyoto, where you've got to attract outsiders, or else you may not have a viable proposition on your hands?
Ooh, well, I hope not, because I can think of a few businesses that are going to go out of business if that's true. No, I think there's plenty of enough local people to keep places going, if they can garner local, regular custom. That shouldn't be a problem, but obviously having extra tourists or foreign residents coming too can't hurt.
And something I hear from foreigners in Japan quite often is they'll say, if you think you can get completely integrated with the Japanese population, you're going to be very frustrated to think you can be accepted into Japanese society. But it sounds like, as far as making friends, having people to hang out with is concerned, finding places where foreigners don't usually go, that is indeed possible, according to your experience.
Yeah, that's possible. I'll always be, the foreign guy. But,
It's not so bad to be the foreign guy, though, is it?
no, it's like Norm walking into Cheers, Norm, when I walk into my favourite bar, Michael, they always call my name, and, I'm a regular guy, but the one guy, friend of mine, he said a few times that he doesn't think of me as a foreigner, but as a Japanese, and he means that as a compliment, So
Really, yes, naturally. But how did you cross that line?
I don't know why that's a compliment, but it doesn't. I mean, to me, my what do you call your national identity? It just because of my own background, I'm Irish parents, but English born. It's for me, it's kind of a random thing. I don't place too much seriousness upon it.
Right.
So I just want to have fun, basically, So if I meet people who can have fun with me and we can have fun together, that's fine.
What sort of establishments, what sort of attractions do you most want to highlight on Deep Kyoto? Like, what are the, or even specific ones? Like, what are the, what kind of thing do you really want to get the word out about?
Oh, there's too many. Where can I start?
Don't name all. I'll say that. By no means am I asking for everything. But what's an example? Anything.
Places that other people are going to be left out. You see, and then I'll be in trouble.
I'll limit you to just saying the name of one, which doesn't even have to be the best. Doesn't have to be anything. But what's an example of just any given one you've written about? Any given place or event that you have written up on Deep Kyoto?
It's not for everybody, but the place where I feel. The bar where I feel most at home is Sun's Music Bar,
Right.
Which it's a music bar. They play an eclectic range of music. The owner, whose nickname is Taisho, which means general, is a very charming man, very friendly man, and I just feel comfortable there. Now, I don't think everybody would feel comfortable there. It's kind of a place where I know I'm going to meet friends. I know most of the people who go there. It's a regular crowd. So, you kind of need to be introduced there. If you just wander in, then, I mean, he'll be friendly, but it's kind of it's my local kind of thing.
Now, as I mentioned at the beginning of the interview, you also do public relations for the Kyoto Journal. And for those who have not run across it, the Kyoto Journal is undergoing a conversion to an online form now, but what is the heritage of this publication? What is their sensibility?
Kyoto Journal was born in the 1980s from a group of enthusiastic, young at the time, foreign residents who were trying to produce things culturally, just for the sake of it, artistic endeavors. And Ken Rogers, who's managing editor. He was doing a thing called the Kyoto Connection at the time, which was, I think, a monthly gathering. I know this by ear. I haven't actually been to the Kyoto Connection. It's long since passed away. But
listeners, by the way, if you've heard recently a talk with Pico Iyer, who came to Kyoto in the 80s. His book, The Lady and the Monk, describes him going to the Kyoto Connection.
Yes, one of the more eccentric gatherings, maybe. But, it was just a space where people could get together and perform whatever they wanted to do. Didn't really matter. So it could be something completely avant-garde or a wonderful music act or juggling or anything. And it was quite famous in its day. Now, at the same time, John Einarsson, a photographer, thought it would be a good idea to start producing a magazine that gave exposure to some of the cultural endeavors of people living in Kyoto, both foreign residents and Japanese people. So much was going on, and so they started Kyoto Journal. They've been going for 26 years. It's expanded in its aim. It's now describes itself as Kyoto-based perspectives on Asia, I think, or Asian perspectives on the world, or something like that. I should know better, being officially the publicity.
It's not limited to Kyoto in terms of... It's not geographically or aesthetically Kyoto limited.
Yes. When I first met Ken, I kind of buttonholed him on what exactly is Kyoto Journal, and it's kind of hard to pin it down, but once you start reading it, you get an idea. And recently we've produced an issue on energy, because that's the big issue in Japan right now. How are we going to get our power safely without ruining the climate? So it's talking about how Japan got involved in nuclear energy and then moved on to hopefully moving on to renewables. 2 years ago, our last print issue was on biodiversity, because we had the biodiversity conference, the UN Biodiversity Conference in Nagoya, COP10, and produced 1,000 copies and just gave them away to COP10 delegates. And before that, there was a peace issue about Article 9 of the Japanese Constitution, which is committing Japan to peace, never having a standing army. And before that, there was also a craft issue. There's an issue on Kyoto Lives. There's an issue on mountains. There's themed issues, but also general issues. So there's a lot of culture, but also a lot of topics of concern: climate, nature, preserving culture, this kind of thing.
And of course, the energy themed issue we're talking about right now is it comes after the last official print issue, but it's fresh currents. It's I guess you'd call it it's a one-off collection from Kyoto Journal contributors, or how do you describe it?
Yes, well, it's a side project really. While they're getting the new website and the new digital issues ready, a kind of core team headed by Eric Johnston, who works for the Japan Times as his day job and does Kyoto Journal as his hobby, I guess. The core team got together and produced this side issue on, as I just said, it's the big issue in using issue there in two different senses. Sorry if that's confusing, but it's the big topic in Japan right now. We needed to get it out quickly, so we needed a kind of efficient, small team of people to do it. But getting articles from the best experts, people who know about the history of nuclear power in Japan, the history of the activist movement against it, the people who know about, ties with the Yakuza and the nuclear industry. Eileen Miyoko-Smith, who's been active against the nuclear industry, and before that was involved in recording the whole Minamata disaster, where I think there was lead poisoning back in the 60s. It was a different kind of contamination, but the same kind of corruption and slack regard for safety standards was involved then too. Just profit over safety was the problem then too. So it's the same kind of thing. She's been involved since the 60s. She's in there, and then also writing on efficiency, energy efficiency, and all the different possible renewable sources: geothermal, wind energy, solar, biomass. It's all in there.
These are geothermal, especially. It's a promising source in Japan, is it not?
It's a huge potential because, as you know, Japan sits on volcanoes, basically, just a chain of volcanoes up and down the country, and fault lines. Obviously, this has advantages and disadvantages, but the potential for geothermal energy is huge. It has not been tapped at all, really. There's been a lot of negative feeling about it from the owners of hot spring tourist resorts, because they feel that building big power stations in these scenes of natural beauty are going to ruin the view for the tourists who come to soak in the baths and look at the mountains. But we believe that there are ways around that. You can make if you have the technology to build these things, you have the technology to make them blend into. And I think Japan is famous for high tech. They can do it.
We talked a little bit before recording about how famous Japan is for high tech, and how we all expect it outside Japan to be living in the 22nd century by now, but that nuclear power seems like an old technology. Like, yeah, fine for France, where they have a lot of old technologies, but for Japan, strange. But then you mentioned, well, of course, this is the land where if you go into a stall in a public restroom, you either see an advanced washlet-equipped futuristic toilet, or you see a squat toilet. You mentioned the blackboards that are in every school, even the swankest private one. What's going on with the bifurcated technology here?
It's a conundrum, isn't it? I can't get to the bottom of that. I'm sorry. I don't know. It's
no need for answers, but what have you observed?
It's just wacky, isn't it? I use the word wacky describing Japan. I promised myself I wouldn't do that. Yeah, I don't know. I can't say. I think they love the new, and they love high tech. They love to discover new things and make new things and build new things and be advanced. But at the same time, there's a stubborn streak which says squatting over a hole in the ground is the healthy way. It probably is, actually. I've heard stories that it's good, it prevents heart disease or something because it exercises certain muscles in your legs. But it's certainly not the civilized way as far as I'm concerned.
Right. I haven't used one of those yet. It just hasn't come up, but I assume there's some sort of period of getting used to that kind of thing.
Yeah, I hate them. But yeah, it's weird. This devotion to old style and new style. I don't know. I think there's a stubborn streak there. It's like the Japanese kind of stubborn attitude towards whaling. They want to keep doing it regardless of what the rest of the world thinks because they think it's traditional. I don't want to get into the controversy over that, but I think a lot of that is just pure stubbornness because they don't need it. I know a lot of communities certainly in the north of Japan where I was volunteering earlier this year are very attached to that industry because it's been part of their lives for so long, So I understand why they don't want to give it up, but to alienate a large part of the world, and when it doesn't actually make any money and they have a huge surplus stock of meat that they can't get rid of, it doesn't really make much sense to me economically anyway. And they're getting lots of tax subsidies, so that's stuff that as a resident I'm paying for. So
no. Yes, of course. And as a vegetarian, a fish-eating vegetarian, I'm sure people have sometimes served you whale then thinking, oh, he eats sea creatures.
Yeah, they think it's just a kind of fish that tastes like beef,
Now, tell me, where do you want to discover next in Kyoto? I mean, how do you find more things to discover here? What would you like to discover and be able to tell people about in Kyoto after all the time you spent here? What do you think the way is to find more, to spread the word about, whether on Deep Kyoto or otherwise, or whether it's the articles you will write for future installments of the Kyoto Journal?
That's a good question.
It's too broad in a sense, but I do wonder what you found what you found the technique is for finding something new in Kyoto.
Well, in a sense, I've been distracted because when I started my blog, I was like, oh, I'm gonna, write about all these little places that foreigners don't go to because I go there so I can only speak Japanese. And then lots of foreigners started getting in touch with me, and I started meeting all these interesting foreign people who are doing artistic things like the Kyoto Journal people or various artists or, people working in different fields, all kinds of fascinating people, but they're all foreigners. So paradoxically, I've acquired this huge range of connections in the foreign community that I didn't have before because of this blog that I didn't want, really. I wanted
to hang out with the Japanese.
Yeah, so I have to get back to that. So I think I need to return to my Japanese studies and develop my Japanese. My formal Japanese is awful. I'm okay sitting in a bar, striking up a casual conversation with Joe Blogg sitting next to me, or Taro Sato sitting next to me, but in a formal situation, my Japanese is terrible because I haven't really had much opportunity to use it. So I need to do that and just get to know some of the people who are doing extraordinary things here, artistically and culturally, who are Japanese as well. I need to balance that out again. I need to go redress the balance.
For Japanese learners, such as, say, myself, or those more advanced than me, most Japanese learners are more advanced than me. Your experience has shown that it's about hanging out with Japanese people, being among Japanese people, where you don't have the English speaker or the Westerner to fall back on. You need to not have the option to speak English.
I'm a terribly lazy man.
You described yourself as a hobbit, I recall.
Oh, you read that, yeah. Yeah, I think of myself more and more frequently as Bilbo Baggins in his little cozy room, likes to drink and eat and enjoy life, and then suddenly gets thrust out into the world and has to have an adventure. And I had that adventure earlier this year when I went up to Tohoku to build houses of all things, which I've never done before, but that was interesting. But, right, yeah, well, I took a year off. I mean, that's it. I was lazy, and I found it hard to concentrate on working and studying at the same time. Some people can do that. I just don't have the staying power for that. So I took a year off and I studied for a year, and I did nothing but study for a year. And so my levels went up dramatically, obviously. And so I was able to make Japanese friends, which was nice, finally having Japanese friends. And it makes you feel like you're at home, makes you feel settled here. And then again, it also improves your Japanese, of course. Once you have Japanese friends, you're speaking Japanese. But you do need to study hard, and you do need to stick with it. If you don't, and if you don't keep at it, even if you've gotten to a certain level, you have to keep going. It's a lifelong pursuit, If you don't keep at it, you'll lose it. So just be determined is the thing. Japanese is a hard language to learn, especially to read. I've recently restarted learning the Chinese characters that it's written with, because I've forgotten so many since I took that year off, and I started reviewing them, and I'm hoping to raise my levels once more, But even though it's difficult, it's fascinating at the same time.
What I think anybody would say about Japanese at a certain point, difficult, but simultaneously fascinating. And I wonder, working with Japanese students of English for so long, teaching them, has that given you any perspective just from the other direction? I mean, English can be a cruelly complex language as well. Just seeing it go the other direction, has that given you a perspective on the learning of Japanese that you're doing?
I teach teenagers, a lot of whom aren't really that interested, or they're interested in theory but not in practice, because really what they want to do is, play their video games or hang out at the mall or whatever. But being one of the native teachers who can speak a little bit of Japanese can be an inspiration for them. It sets an example. Oh, it can be done. Look at him, he did it. How did he do it? And sometimes they ask me, how did you do that? So I tell them, I took a year off.
Right. All you kids, take a year off. Do it.
I live here. That also helps.
Yeah, move to an Anglophone country.
Yeah, and I have a Japanese girlfriend, which helps too.
Right. So get a Western significant other. Then these are.
Recently, I've noticed that she's speaking more English and I'm speaking more English too. So that's
sooner or later you average out.
My laziness is winning out there, and we have to redress that balance again. Yeah.
But see, a hobbit never would have moved to Japan.
That's true, yeah. So you're saying I'm not really a hobbit? Well, I guess I was a dissatisfied hobbit. I wasn't very comfortable where I was, let's say that. I wanted to travel, yeah. And I was drawn to Japanese culture. I was drawn to Japanese art and Japanese poetry. There was something about it that just struck me as very accessible for me personally. And just struck a note, and I thought, I want to go there. I want to find out where that's coming from, and I want to be able to do something like that. Yeah.
14 years later, here you are.
Here I am. I think you're going to interview Stephen Gill in a few days. He runs a haiku class. We write in English, but they are haiku. He's a very nice haiku poet. And I'm learning how to write haiku, and I'm enjoying it immensely. And, walking out in nature with him sometimes too. And writing haiku about nature, and it's a wonderful thing to do.
And there you have a small preview, listeners, of coming attractions. But for now, I've been sitting here in Kyoto, Japan, speaking with Michael Lambe, who is a teacher, a blogger, the founder of Deep Kyoto. He is the public relations guy for the Kyoto Journal, and as well, he was a dissatisfied hobbit, which is what led him here. Michael, thanks so much.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
This has been Notebook on Cities and Culture. I've been Colin Marshall. You can keep up with the cultural creators, internationalists, and observers of the urban scene on the show at colinmarshall.org. Thanks. And special thanks to everybody who backed Season 3 on Kickstarter, including Paige Calvert, Jonathan Crow, Douglas Dollars, Paul Doyle, John French, Eric Graham, Will Graham, Umberto Grant, Kimberly Hahn, Carl Haley, Stefan Halperin, Matt Howie, Andrew Hovanek, Mark Hines, Andy Cooney, Mark Larson, Matthew Lickey, Mr. Munvirzi, Rob Motz, Lindsay Muniak, Daniel Murphy, Aidan Nullman, Patrick O'Flaherty, Danny Olson, Michael O'Regan, Blake Riley, Rob Schultz, Cam Smith, Small Demons, Todd Shimoda, Kevin Smokler, Thomas Unterberger, Matt Warren, and Wayne Wright.